Kent Shuffle, thanks for being with us. Pat Gowan's alongside. Pat's one of the editors with the Post-Dispatch. Welcome, Pat.
I can't.
And Sam Stem, the president and general manager of WBGZ, is here. Welcome, Sam.
Glad to be back.
Sam, Governor Quinn has signed a new budget. He's given it his approval. However, it does not include a pay raise for 30,000 state employees. He says the legislature did not include the funding for those pay raises. Was Quinn correct in canceling those raises, even though a contract was in place?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Some of the legislators say, well, we didn't negotiate the contract with the unions, the governor did. So they didn't feel the need to include the money in there. But ultimately, this will be decided in the courts. There's precedent for this. There was a time in the past when there was a cost of living increase due the judges, and the legislature didn't allocate money for it, and the case ended up in court, and lo and behold, the judges got their raise. So, it'll be before the judges again. Now, it's not necessarily their raise this time, but, it would seem to me, without being a judge myself or knowing a whole lot about the law, that if you have a contract, if the state signed a contract with the unions that said, yes, you're going to get a raise, I think they're going to have to pay them the raise. But again, some in the legislature have said, well, that's not our contract. Well, yeah, it's the state's contract. So I think maybe Pat Quinn was just trying to send a message here, and probably knowing full well that eventually these state workers are going to get their raises once it ends up in court.
Pat, was Governor Quinn correct in deleting the raises for the 30,000 state employees from the state budget?
Well, it is a contract, but the state of Illinois has signed a whole lot of contracts to pay a whole lot of people a whole lot of money. It hasn't been real good about a whole lot of them. So I guess we're going to see about that. In terms of public sympathy, the agencies that are most strongly hit, I was looking at the average pay for those agencies. Corrections, average pay a little more than $62,000 a year. Human Services, more than $55,000 a year. Natural Resources, almost $43,000 a year. Public Health, almost $65,000 a year. Now, nobody's getting rich at those levels of pay, and I'm not begrudging anybody paying the 2% raise, but the real economic realities of the day are that people are losing their jobs, people are losing their raises, people are taking furloughs, people are taking pay cuts. The state of Illinois is second to none in being in the cooking pot of the recession. And so I would have a hard time as an employee of the state making too much noise about giving up a 2% pay raise in the middle of all this mess. It's probably not real politic at a time when there's public will to cut your pay, cut your numbers, cut your pensions. I don't think I'd want to aggravate that if I were them. On the other hand, I believe if I sign a contract, I ought to be good to the contract. Quinn's doing something that a lot of people of both parties want done, and that's to say, if you don't have the money for it, don't spend it. He's looking ahead through the budget saying, if we give the raise, we're going to be out of money before the end of the fiscal year. What do we do then? So for some people, he's trying to do the fiscally responsible thing on the front end, which proves once again, under these conditions, the governor's in an absolute no-win situation. Why anybody wants to be governor, I have no idea. I think it probably will play out in the courts. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see them get their raise. The statement gets made, but there isn't enough money to cover it, and that's between a rock and a hard place.
Sam, Governor Quinn's budget also cuts funding for school district transportation, for regional offices of education, and for Medicaid. He made all these cuts without the blessing of the legislature. Is he setting himself up for problems with the lawmakers?
Well, he's already got problems with the lawmakers. They're not on the same page. He has his priorities and they have theirs, and the real problem is that there's not enough money to go around. So, we could probably, the three of us here, sit down and work out a problem. Hey, you've got these obligations and you got this money. Each one of you three guys figure out how you're going to do it. We come up with three different ways of doing it, and until they figure out how to come up with the money, there are going to be disagreements on, how do we cut and where do we cut. And the problem is everybody says we'll cut, but nobody wants their pet project cut. If you've got kids in school or you're pro-education and education is getting cut, you're saying, well, that's the wrong place to cut somewhere else. If you're poor and you need medical care you're going to say, well, don't cut Medicaid. I need that money. So that's the real problem right there. And I don't think you're ever going to see the governor and the legislature in total agreement with how to proceed. You're never going to see even members of the majority party in sync with their leadership. You go talk to many state legislators around the many counties of the state, and they'll tell you, well, I don't really support the leadership, but I have to be on board, or some of my pet projects, or some of my district's spending priorities won't get funded. So I have to go along in order to get along. So that's the real problem, and it's not going to be, I think Pat mentioned it last week, it's not going to be resolved until the economy recovers. Once we get into a growth economy, then there's going to be more money available, because there's going to be more money flowing and more money, more tax revenues flowing in, and then you're going to see things moving in the right direction. In the meantime, there is no choice. After the taxes have already been raised and there's still not enough money, there is no choice but to cut. And what the governor decides to cut is going to be different than what the legislative leaders are going to decide to cut.
Is the governor doing what the lawmakers should do, or is it a matter of just there's disagreement, so regardless of what the governor did, it's not going to coincide with the lawmakers' wishes?
Well, yeah, the problem is, in part, the legislature hasn't addressed it totally. And unfortunately, with an election year coming up next year, they're not going to address it. And so ultimately it is going to end up on the governor's desk, as it has in many other states. And in many other states, you see governors and legislatures at odds. And at least Illinois hasn't quite digressed into some of the serious disagreements we've seen elsewhere. But I imagine it could end up there ultimately. But the answer to your question is, yeah, probably the governor's dealing with things that the legislature ought to have, but is institutionally incapable of.
Pat, is the governor going to create problems for himself? Is he doing the things the legislature should be doing when he cuts transportation funding for school districts, regional offices of education, Medicaid? None of those cuts were approved by the legislature.
Sam made me think of my days when I was studying architecture. I wanted to be an architect. I took classes toward that, mechanical drawing and so forth, and there came a point at which we were taught, when you were having trouble getting everything to fit together exactly the way you wanted it to, you wrote field fit on the blueprints. And field fit meant the guy who's putting it together can figure this out better than you could figure it out at a drafting table, so just let him do it. Now, it was never field fit subject to second guessing. It was just field fit. So the issue wasn't whether you could then come back and say, oh, I didn't like the way you did it, although I suppose maybe there was a mechanism for that. Thank God with my math skills I never became an architect. It was not an issue. So yeah, this is desperation. These are every man for himself, every woman for herself times in Springfield. And the governor, if the legislature isn't getting the job done, the governor darn well has to pick up the axe and do it. Now, Medicaid's problematic on both ends because it involves money that Republicans are interested in as well as Democrats, because the medical care people, by and large, the top dogs are Republicans. They don't want to see it cut. That's being deferred. School transportation is, by the usual state school situation, the state pays as much as it darn well chooses moment by moment, and the locals pay the rest. And good luck figuring out how it plays out year to year, almost month by month. Regional offices of education, by way of disclosure, my wife does some contract work for them, but they're an interesting buffer between the state and the local school district. The governor says these are local issues for the regional office of education. Well, if you work for the Edwardsville School District, you've got to have a state license to be a teacher, not a local license. Edwardsville isn't licensed teachers. The state licenses teachers. It's administered through the regional office. If there is no regional office, then do you license teachers school district by school district, or does the state take that over? And if the state takes it over, will they save any money? These are the kind of issues that I don't hear talked about.
We need to take a break. We've got more Metro Talk coming up in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Audrey Lucchese, and I'm from Alton, Illinois. I love music, and that's why I came to Lewis & Clark. It's been an amazing experience here at Lewis & Clark, working with students that are so talented, coming from all over the area, and they work so hard to follow their dreams. The music faculty at Lewis & Clark they're fantastic, and they're there every step of the way to push you to follow your dreams. One of the unique opportunities that I have had at Lewis & Clark is being able to record my own music with a fellow student here. Being able to record our music has opened doors for us in the music industry. My long-term goal is to finish here at Lewis & Clark and then to transfer to a four-year school and finish my degree in music performance. I would recommend Lewis & Clark to another student because it is definitely a great place to get started and it can open so many doors for you.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
Watching Metro Talk, I'm Kent Scheffel. Sam Stem and Pat Gowan are here. Pat, Congressman John Shimkus says it's time to go to court over the new congressional map that's been drawn. Is it going to make any difference if the Republicans go to court over this map and sue?
No. And if the Republicans had been in control of the legislature and the map was drawn, they'd have drawn a favorable map for the GOP, and the Democrats would be raising tarnation and going to court. So no, I don't think it makes much difference. It's a bizarre looking map. I live in Highland. This district would go from Metropolis up the Indiana border all the way past Rantoul, leaving out Champaign, however, because that would be in the same district with Bloomington and, of course, Collinsville. That would be Shimkus's district. Interestingly, Shimkus's district is pretty safe. They've drawn it in a way that looks like it's going to keep Shimkus in office. The problem is the Republicans are guessing that as many as 5 members of the GOP may be ousted by the way these districts are drawn, although they were drawn to be compact and contiguous and fair. But that would be a different compactness, contiguity, and contiguity, I guess, and fairness than the Democrats would have if they were in charge. But the Republicans gained, I think, 4 seats in the last election over the Democrats, and they may lose that and more the way the map is drawn. And the real moral to the story is be in control of the legislature when the decennial drawing of the maps come along.
Sam, is it going to make any difference if the Republicans go to court over the new maps? Congressman Shimkus says it's time to sue.
Well, not only Congressman Shimkus, but 10 of the 11 Republican congresspeople in Illinois have signed on or are backing this lawsuit. They're being led by former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, and also Lynn Martin. So she and Hastert are going to lead the charge for the lawsuit. The only Republican congressman that didn't sign on, is not supporting the lawsuit, is Tim Johnson of Urbana, and he says he's not going to bother because they're not going to be successful. The other 10 say, well, we've got a good chance of success. But, you know, the burden of proof is pretty tough to show that the Democrats didn't follow the rules as written, compact and contiguous and all the things Pat mentioned. But, you know, who knows what version of the dictionary they're going to use in trying to prove it. So it happens every 10 years. The minority party generally says it isn't fair and threatens to go to court, and many times does go to court, and very seldom are they successful. What I find really interesting is that the Democrats have gone to a lot of trouble up in the Chicago area to take some very safe Democratic districts up there and extend them further into the Republican suburbs, but not far enough that it would put the Democrats in danger. So it basically erodes away at some of the Republican power base in the suburbs, makes those districts smaller, and lumps some of those Republicans into the very safe Democratic districts in the more urban area. So, but again, as Pat said, that if the Republicans were in power, they'd be doing the same thing in reverse. They'd be taking safe Republican districts and trying to eat away at the safe Democratic districts. So in answer to your question, no, it probably won't make one iota of difference whatsoever, but it'll make the Republicans feel good for pounding their chests and threatening to go to court, and they'll eventually be sent home with their tails between their legs, and then they'll have to figure out how to run in the districts as they exist for the next 10 years.
Pat, former Governor George Ryan was released from prison for a short time to be with his wife, who was dying from cancer. Former Governor Jim Thompson says actually Ryan's been released 4 times to be with his wife. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. This is not an axe murderer, for heaven's sakes. He's a man who did a lot of honorable work and some dishonorable work as well. The man is now 77 years old. He won't be out of prison until a 6.5-year term, I believe, ends in early 2013. He'll overlap Governor Blagojevich. Maybe they could be cellmates or something. But consider that Blagojevich got 10 years in prison. Blagojevich would be 15 years younger when he got out than Ryan. I mean, that's a lot of difference, a lot of life. Ryan and his wife were very committed to each other. I remember her. I used to travel with his campaign sometimes as a reporter. She was a very nice, very quiet lady. And when he tried to get early release based on concerns for caring for his terminally ill wife, the judge said, look, we've got a lot of people who are sole breadwinners, who have sick relatives, sick wives, sick children, destitute families. The law cannot be based on that. And I understand that well enough, but I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that the man would get a mercy visit home to say goodbye to his wife. I understand they held off pulling the plug on her until he could be there to be a part of it, and I think that's just basic compassion. So I was glad to see that happened that way.
Sam, former Governor Ryan was released from prison long enough to be with his wife, who was dying from cancer. Is that okay?
Well, it's a little bit confounding in that they had asked on numerous occasions, asked the district court and then ultimately the appellate court, and they had been denied at every turn. First for early release, so that he could be with her, and then even had requested short visits, and the courts had said no all along. And then the warden took it upon himself to grant these apparently 4 furloughs, including the last one at the time of her death. Well, I did some checking, and apparently federal law allows for that. The warden may grant furloughs without the permission of the court, but the guideline is that the prisoner has to be within the final 2 years of his sentence. So I checked further, and according to the U.S. Department of Corrections website, George Ryan is slated to be released on July 14th of 2013. So he's not quite in that 2-year window, and yet he got these 4 furloughs. And what bothers me about it, on a human level, it's like, what does it hurt for this man to go say goodbye to his wife of 55 years, who, by the way, went to great pains to go to the prison to be with her husband on their 55th wedding anniversary just recently. But so on the human level, what does it hurt? But does everybody get this treatment? That's what bothers me. Or does just George Ryan, the former governor of Illinois, get the treatment? Who is this warden? Is he, was he put in place by Republicans, and so he's paying, and if, say 5 years from now, Rod Blagojevich is in prison and Patty's dying, will he get the same treatment from a warden? But, would some crack addict who's reformed and is 2.5 years from being released, would he have gotten the same treatment if one of his children or his mother was dying? And I think the answer is probably not. And so that's the part that bothers me is, if we're going to have equal justice under the law, then everybody should be treated equally. And it just smacks of the fact that the court said no, the appellate court said no, and yet the warden said it's okay, and that bothers me.
We'll have more Metro Talk right after this.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Clark Minute. Today we're going to check out the radio broadcasting program in WLCA with Mike Lemons.
Have you ever listened to your favorite radio station or your favorite disc jockey and say, I could do that? Or maybe you're the type of person who says, I could never do something like that. Well, with the help of first-year mass comm student John, we're going to show you just how easy it is. Each voice intro starts with talking about the band that just played, and we add a station identifier. Next, you want to offer some information that may be of interest to your audience. And finally, tell the listeners what the next song is, who sings it, followed by another station identifier. John will do one live now.
Silver Sun Pickup substitution on WLCA. The Big Pink released their debut album called A Brief History of Love. The single is off that album. It's The Big Pink with Dominoes. It's on College Radio's Best 89.9.
This has been your Lewis and Clark Minute.
What's that? I don't know. Something I kind of made. Ooh, what's it do?
What do I do? Well, thanks for asking. I ring my bell and I like to dance. What do I do? Well, thanks for asking.
Ow! Yeah, it still needs a little work.
Anything's possible. Keep thinking. Get started on your own inventions or just play some games at inventnow.org.
Sounds like you could use some Van Gogurt. It's fortified with arch-rich nutrients to improve your math and reading skills. Catch!
Van Gogurt, thanks. So what's the deal with your ear?
Always with the ear, huh?
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
This is Metro Talk. I'm Kent Scheffel. Sam Stem and Pat Gowan are here. Sam, questions have arisen over whether there's going to be less corruption in Illinois now that former Governor Blagojevich has been found guilty. Bottom line is, will the Blagojevich verdict have any impact on corruption in the state?
Well, you know, you'd like to think so, wouldn't you? But on the other hand, you know, Otto Kerner went to prison. Dan Walker went to prison. George Ryan went to prison, and it didn't seem to have any deterrent effect on Blagojevich whatsoever. So who's to say who down the road, you know, are they going to look back? I think, you know, the corrupt people and the criminal mind, there's always that thought of, I'm smarter than these other guys. I'm smarter than the ones that came before. I'm not going to get caught. Or they don't think it's wrong to begin with. They think they're entitled in some way, shape, or form. And I really think that was Blagojevich's mentality. I really believe that Rod Blagojevich believes to this very moment that he didn't do anything wrong. He was just doing what everybody else does. He was entitled. He had risen to the pinnacle, and he was entitled to try to get something for his position, something personally. And you go back, and over the weekend, I actually saw part of the movie, the Oliver Stone movie Nixon. And I really believe that Nixon didn't think that he was obstructing justice. He was just trying to protect himself and his policies from his enemies. And so will the Blagojevich conviction have any effect? I'm afraid the answer is probably not. That, you know, those who are inclined to be corrupt and to use their power in the wrong way are going to do that because they're not going to believe that they're doing anything wrong, so therefore, or they're going to believe that they were smarter than Blagojevich and Ryan and Walker and Kerner, and they won't get caught.
Pat, are we going to see any less corruption in Illinois as a result of the Blagojevich verdict?
Well, maybe not, and I'll use the George Ryan example to show you why George Ryan's conviction made corruption worse, not better, in Illinois. And it really did, and here's why. Because Ryan didn't run for governor in 2002 because the scandal had already descended upon him. And although he was not yet charged and convicted, the man was in deep trouble and everybody knew it. So who ends up being the Republican nominee in 2002 to run against Blagojevich? Jim Ryan. Former Attorney General, no relation to George whatsoever, but he runs with the Ryan name. So everybody knows there's a Ryan in big trouble, and the guy who's running to succeed the Republican Governor Ryan is a Republican named Ryan. It was confusing. Whether it was confusing enough to give us Rod Blagojevich, I don't know, but it certainly contributed to Blagojevich's win, I can say without any question. One might argue that if Ryan had not been corrupt, Jim Ryan would have won the governorship, may never have been a corrupt man himself. Blagojevich would have been foreclosed, and we would have been spared this whole mess. So therefore, sometimes convicting these people actually makes it worse. Now, my premise depends upon something that's already passed, and that was the question of whether Blagojevich would be succeeded by an unrelated candidate from, it was a Democrat named Blagojevich, and that wasn't very likely to happen. But I think the name Ryan, with the Jack Ryan debacle when he ran for the Senate, another unrelated Ryan who had political troubles, not criminal trouble, I think the name Ryan's been pretty well mined out for Illinois politics for a while to come. And I expect if you happen to be a Blagojevich and you want political office in Illinois, you better start working on changing your name.
But you know, that name thing, you just never know, because there were, back when State Senator Bill Hayne endorsed a little-known state senator by the name of Obama for the U.S. Senate, a lot of people said, well, there's no way in the world anybody named Obama is going to be elected to the Senate at a time when we're chasing a terrorist by the name of Osama. But it didn't quite work out that way. And now look where he is.
Well, it didn't work out that way, but partly because Jim Ryan got involved in the sex scandal in his own marriage as the Republican and ended up essentially destroying his candidacy and being replaced by somebody who couldn't possibly win. So there again, if it weren't for Ryan in trouble, maybe Blagojevich would never have been elected to the Senate, and if he weren't, he certainly was never going to become president based on being state senator. He might have been president one day, but it would have pushed it down the line.
Now, it wasn't Jim Ryan, though. It was another Ryan.
No, it was Jim Ryan.
Oh, it was
I'm sorry, no, Jack Ryan.
Jack Ryan.
Oh, good
yeah.
Lord. Thank you for saving me, Sam. Too many Ryans. That was Jack Ryan.
That's right.
Jim Ryan had no sex scandal whatsoever. In fact, no scandal whatsoever that I'm aware of attached to the name Jim Ryan.
That was also Harrison Ford's name in some of the movies, Jack Ryan.
Jack Ryan, that's right. He was like a secret agent or whatever. Well, this guy was sort of operated on that level in some ways.
But that proves your point. There were just too many Ryans.
Even I can't keep them all straight, but wasn't George.
Yeah.
Much lighter topic, Sam. St. Charles, the city, is now looking at allowing people to keep pet pigs if they're small enough. Does that make sense?
I guess, why not? You know, my understanding is that pigs are cleaner than a lot of other animals, that they just have a bad reputation. So, you know, on Green Acres, they had Arnold Ziffel, and that was never a problem. So why not? I'm not going to move to St. Charles anyway, so it doesn't bother me one way or the other.
Pat?
Well, my son's cat's larger than their pig, and the law would have allowed his cat, so it does seem kind of silly to bar it.
That's going to do it for this edition of Metro Talk. Thanks for being with us. Sam Stem, the president and general manager of WBGZ, has been here, along with Pat Gowan, one of the editors with the Post-Dispatch. I'm Kent Shuffle. We'll see you next time.